Welcome to our journey of exploring the practices of the United Methodist Church following the historic General Conference of 2024. Last week we explored the practice of futuring, and I concluded by saying if a person is uncomfortable with futuring being a practice of faith, they will be uneasy in the faith community called United Methodist. Return to the good old days is an abandoned journey in the United Methodist Church. But this week we're considering another practice, and that's the practice of balancing. Now, if you've never heard about that in the life of the church, join me. I haven't either, but it's an important element, and I think it's a personal journey that I've been on. I was 20 years old when I first received a student appointment as a senior in college. During my 65 years of being a student pastor, a pastor, an annual conference program director, a college president, and a bishop, and in retirement, I've experienced the following: the birth of extremism in the United Methodist Church happened in this period of time. That birth of extremism soon became an adolescent movement composed of persons who denied the need for any balance in their journey of faith. Adolescent movements, extreme movements, soon became antagonistic forces. These were minority forces, but sought to dominate in order to be the only voice of the United Methodist Church. It took one more generation for the struggle between these extremists to be the dominant agenda of the United Methodist Church. The dominant agenda became extremist, and for the past quarter of a century, the struggle to see which extremist minority group within the United Methodist Church would control the denomination has dominated our life. Some would describe this journey as the struggle of a divided house to stand. Now, throughout my career of these 65 years, I've witnessed the journey of those who did not identify with either extreme. Through thick and thin, they've been the voice calling in the wilderness of conflict and separation, calling for the United Methodist Church to be a faith community representing the practice of balancing. Now, this practice is like walking a tight wire. And the key to walking a tight wire is the balancing rod. These non-extremists were marked by the ability to listen to both extremes, but always insisting that the life and teachings of Jesus, the revelation of agape love, must finally prevail. In 2024, these voices prevailed, and the United Methodist Church is committed to the practice of balancing. This practice of balancing was experienced when a decision was made to give every geographical region throughout the world the same rights and privileges to determine the nature of their journey of faith, rather than the practice of granting that right and privilege to some parts, but not to others. That's balancing. rights and privilege to be the same for all. It was experienced in the General Conference when it was assumed that the United Methodist witness is not based on doctrines and creeds, but rather based on the divine mission of agape love as revealed in Jesus. Jesus didn't reveal a creed. Jesus didn't reveal a doctrine. Jesus revealed agape love. This practice of balancing was experienced when partisanship was abandoned. You see, extremism leads to partisanship, and partisanship was replaced by a commitment of what is good for all, not just good for one part. This is so crucial for the United Methodist Church going forward, because we had become a denomination of parties. Votes at annual, jurisdictional, and general conferences, and sometimes local churches, were oftentimes determined by what was best for a party, partisanship, a part of the whole, rather than what was for the common good of all. Now, as we consider the importance of the practice of balancing, it's helpful to remember the issues that the early Christian church faced, the early followers of Jesus faced. We discover in the letters of Paul that partisanship and extremism is not a product of the 20th century church. Nope. Paul, in the first century after the death of Jesus, warned against extremists. His own personal journey included being an extremist who sought to prevent the witness of agape love by the followers of Jesus. Now, the how do you prevent extremism? How do you prevent partisanship? Well, a letter of Paul comes to mind. Galatians 5:22 and 23 said, "This is the way you avoid extremism. This is the way you avoid partisanship. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law." I just want to make it clear. In the last 65 years of my career, too often, love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control have not been the practice of extremists and antagonists and partisanship in the life of the church. You see, this passage represents a balancing rod of the tight wire walker, which is really the call to discipleship. You see, this passage reminds the community of faith that when you lean too far one way or the other, you're certainly going to abandon and fall off the way of agape love. Paul offers these behaviors that, when practiced, prevents the faith community from leaning one way or the other and falling off the high calling of Jesus. That high calling that was described by John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, when he said, "Beware of orthodoxy." That's the expression of extremism often. The representation of partisanship. He said, "Be aware of orthodoxy. Believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior and hold any opinion that you wish." You see, in balancing, the United Methodist Church has decided that human opinions are not the balancing pole in our journey of faith. Human experiences are not the balancing pole. The balancing pole is behaving, Galatians 5:21 and 22. When one is committed to this way of life, partisanship and extremism are simply not an option. And it's my own personal experience that when extremism and partisanship is inviting, what keeps me on the road of striving to follow Jesus is when I heed the list of Paul. When I heed the gifts of the Spirit, all of a sudden my inclination to be partisan, my inclination to be an extremist is less inviting, because I've got to be a person of love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And you know, as an extremist, as one who is committed to partisanship, some of those are pretty hard. For instance, gentleness and self-control. Whether or not the United Methodist Church can stay the course of vital balancing act will be determined by our collective commitment to the way of life described by Paul. When a faith community is committed to this way of life, diversity of opinions is a gift rather than a threat. Racial and cultural differences are accepted and understood. Traditions are sources of wisdom, not laws, to be practiced and obeyed. Let me repeat that. When a faith community is committed to this way of life, the gifts of the Spirit, diversity of opinions is a gift rather than a threat. Racial and cultural differences are accepted and understood, and traditions are sources of wisdom rather than laws to be obeyed. There's a hymn. We sing our practices. There's a hymn which captures this practice of balancing. It's number 547 in the hymnal. We don't sing it often, but we probably ought to, because let me read a couple of verses. O Church of God, united to serve one common Lord, proclaim to all one message. Remember Wesley? With hearts in glad accord. Christ ever goes before us, we follow day by day, with strong and eager footsteps along the upward way. Though creeds and tongues may differ, they speak, O Christ, of thee, and in thy loving spirit we shall one people be. Lord, may our faithful service and singleness of aim proclaim to all the power of thy redeeming name. Wow. Frederick Morley. put it together, didn't he? Yes, you see, I'm convinced that if a person is uncomfortable with the experience of balancing in the faith journey rather than partisanship and extremism, they will be easy in the faith community of the United Methodist Church. There's a lot there, wasn't there? For your thought and conversation, here's some questions. What are your personal experiences of partisanship and extremism existing in the community of faith? Secondly, what are your personal experiences of the gifts of the Spirit identified by Paul, prevailing in difficult times in the life of a faith community? And finally, what's your comfort level with a faith community in which diversity is cherished, racial and cultural differences are accepted, and traditions are sources of wisdom rather than laws to be obeyed? Thank you for our journey together in discovering a new way for a new day.